The freighter had 3 broken cargo clamps, a cracked coolant pipe, and a pilot who had not slept in 31 hours. Ray Dodd was not the kind of man who complained about any of those things. He had been hauling supplies to the outer reach colonies for 19 years, and he had learned early that space did not care about your problems. He was eating cold noodles from a tin when the scanner made a sound it had never made before. Not the soft ping of a passing asteroid, not the low hum of a nearby ship. This was a long, flat scream, the kind of alert that the scanner manual described as a mass entry event. Ray put the tin down slowly. He leaned forward in his seat and looked at the screen. 412 contacts, all Dreth. He had seen Dreth ships once before, years ago at a distance. Big dark things, shaped like closed fists, moving with the slow confidence of something that had never been hurt. That time there had been 6 of them escorting a trade convoy. He had given them a wide berth and not thought about it much after. This was not 6. The contacts were still coming in as the FTL distortion cleared. The Dreth Armada was enormous. It filled his scanner the way a storm fills a sky, not in one place but everywhere, spreading out in a formation so wide it took him a moment to understand the scale of it. The nearest ship was 200,000 kilometers away, and it was already the size of a city on his screen. Ray looked out the cockpit window at the small cluster of lights that was the mining colony. About 900 people lived there. They processed ore, sent it back to Earth on ships like his, and went about their lives. They had 2 old defensive turrets that had not been tested in 4 years, and a colony administrator who had never once had to deal with anything more serious than a broken water recycler. He opened a comms channel to the colony. The Dreth jammed it before the first word came out. Ray sat very still for a moment. Then he turned off his running lights, cut his main engine, and let the freighter drift into the shadow of a large asteroid. He did not run. Running would put him in open space with no cover and a Dreth ship between him and any safe destination. He would die tired and alone in the dark, and it would not help anyone. Instead, he pulled up his emergency beacon, the deep-range one, the military frequency, the one every civilian ship carried and no civilian pilot ever expected to actually use. His thumb rested on the button for a second. He pressed it. The signal went out in all directions. It carried his location, the colony location, the contact count, and the Dreth fleet formation data his scanner had captured in those first few seconds before the jamming went up. It was not much, but it was something. Then he waited. The Dreth ships did not move quickly. That was the thing about them. They did not need to rush. They moved the way a wall moves when it is pushed by something very large, slow, steady, and with the absolute certainty that nothing in front of it would still be standing when it arrived. Urak, the war commander of the Armada, watched the colony on his long-range display and felt nothing in particular about it. It was not the first colony he had taken. It would not be the last. His ships were designed for one kind of warfare. They formed up in a tight battle line, brought all guns to bear on a single point, and fired until that point no longer existed. Every civilization they had fought had done the same thing, lined up their own ships, traded fire, and eventually broken under the weight of the Dreth broadside. It was a simple and reliable method. Urak had never had reason to question it. His intelligence officer placed a report on the console beside him. Human defensive assets in this sector, minimal. Human military response time to this location, estimated 45 minutes to 2 hours, depending on what was stationed at the nearest relay point. By the time any human warships arrived, the colony would already be secured. Urak did not read the second page of the report. The second page contained an analyst's note about the new human fleet doctrine, something about independent strike groups, distributed targeting, ships built for speed rather than firepower. The analyst had flagged it as a possible concern. Urak did not read analyst notes. In his experience, analysts worried about everything and were wrong about most of it. Out in the asteroid field, Ray was watching the Dreth formation through his scanner when something new appeared on the screen. 30 small contacts, moving in from the outer edge of the system at high speed. No transponder signals. No comms traffic. Completely dark. He recognized the silhouettes, human destroyers, Hornet class. He had seen them in a newscast once, lean, fast, ugly little ships that looked like someone had bolted weapons onto a knife. The report had called them a new class of vessel, designed for rapid response combat. The military commentator had said they were fast enough to outrun anything the Dreth fleet had and armed well enough to hurt things much bigger than themselves. 30 of them against 400. Ray looked at the numbers for a long time. Then, for the first time in what felt like days, he smiled. Not because the numbers were good. They were terrible numbers. He smiled because of the way those 30 ships were moving, not charging in, not forming a line, not doing anything that the Dreth would recognize as an attack pattern. They were spreading out, threading between asteroids, circling wide around the edges of the Armada like something that was not looking for a fight. Like something that was looking for the right angle. Ray ate the rest of his cold noodles and watched. The Dreth had a word for the feeling that came before a victory. It did not translate well into any human language, but the closest meaning was something like the calm weight of a stone before it falls. Urak felt it now. He stood at the front of his command bridge and looked at the colony on his display and felt that stone weight settle in his chest. His fleet was almost in position. Another 20 minutes and his forward line would be within broadside range. The colony had not responded to his demand for surrender, probably because his jamming array was blocking their communications entirely, which meant they could not respond even if they wanted to. That was fine. Surrender before bombardment was a courtesy, not a requirement. His tactical officer flagged a movement on the outer scanner. 30 small contacts, human class, moving at the edges of the system. Urak looked at them without concern. 30 ships, against 400. He did not need his intelligence reports to do that arithmetic. He told his tactical officer to note the contacts and continue the advance. What Urak did not know, what his intelligence reports had described in words but not in feeling, was that those 30 human destroyers were not thinking the way his ships thought. Each Dreth battlecruiser operated as part of a line. It received orders from the war commander, moved to its assigned position, and fired when the order came. That was strength. That was discipline. That was how wars were won. Each human destroyer operated as its own decision-making unit. The captain, a bearded man named Dov, had given his squadron one set of instructions before they went dark: find the gaps and hurt them. Everything after that was up to the individual ships. Dov had been flying Hornet-class destroyers for 11 years. He understood these ships the way some people understand a language they grew up speaking, not by thinking about the rules but by feeling when something is right. And right now, looking at the Dreth formation on his passive scanner, he was feeling something very specific. The Dreth ships were beautiful in their way. Big, armored, perfectly aligned. Every gun pointed outward in a wall of firepower that could crack a planet if it all fired at once. But that wall had to be facing the right direction to work. And the Dreth had built their whole doctrine around the assumption that an enemy would come at them from the front. Dov split his 30 ships into 4 groups of 7 and 1 reserve of 2. He assigned each group a vector not straight at the Armada, but threading in from the sides, the rear corners, the space between the formation's outer ships, places where the big Dreth guns could not rotate fast enough to track something small and fast. He sent the order in a single tight beam pulse, so short the Dreth jammers almost certainly did not catch it. One word. Go. The first group hit from the upper left flank at a combined closing speed that gave the targeted Dreth battlecruiser approximately 4 seconds to react. Its point defense systems fired and took out 2 incoming missiles. The other 6 got through. The battle cruiser did not explode. It was too well armored for that. But its port engine array went dark and it began to drift. The human ships were already gone before the Dreth gunners on the neighboring ship had finished rotating their turrets. The second group came from the rear, targeting the communication relay ship that sat at the back of the formation. A communication relay ship was not a warship. It had light armor and 2 defensive cannons. It lasted 9 seconds. When it went dark, the Dreth formation lost the tight signal link that allowed Urak to send simultaneous orders to all 400 ships. From that moment forward, the Dreth fleet had to rely on individual ship communications. There was a delay now. A small one, maybe 3 seconds between an order leaving Urak's bridge and arriving at the outer ships. 3 seconds sounds like nothing. In a battle against ships moving as fast as the human destroyers, 3 seconds was an enormous gap. Urak finally felt something other than the calm stone weight. He felt irritation. He ordered the formation to compress, close the gaps between ships, eliminate the angles the human destroyers were using, present a solid wall of armor on all sides. It was the correct defensive response to a harassing attack. Every military doctrine he had ever studied agreed on this point. His ships began to move together. In the asteroid field, Ray was watching the Dreth formation compress on his scanner and he frowned. He was not a military man. He did not know tactics or fleet doctrine, but he had spent 19 years flying cargo through asteroid fields, and he knew a very basic truth about large objects moving into tight spaces. When things get close together, they start blocking each other. He thought about the big Dreth cannons. Long guns, heavy guns, guns that needed clear space in front of them to fire without hitting a neighboring ship. He thought about what happened to those guns when the ships they were mounted on moved into a tight cluster. He set down his scanner, picked up his cold tin of noodles and found it was empty. He had finished them without noticing. He dropped the tin, pulled a ration bar from his pocket and kept watching. On the Dreth command bridge, Urak watched his fleet compress into a tighter formation and felt the stone weight returning. The human destroyers were pulling back now, staying at the edges of their range, not pressing in. He interpreted this as the small force recognizing it could not win a close engagement against his armor. He was partially right. The human destroyers were not pressing in. They were waiting. Specifically, they were waiting for the second signal, the one that would tell them the rest of the fleet had arrived. Dov checked his timer. 14 minutes since the distress beacon had gone out. He knew the math. He had been told the math before he left the relay station. He just had to keep the Dreth busy for a little while longer. He picked another gap in the compressed formation. Smaller now, tighter, but still there. He sent 3 ships through it at full burn, not to destroy anything critical, just to make the Dreth flinch, just to keep Urak's attention fixed on the small threat in front of him. It worked. Urak never looked behind him until it was too late. There is a moment in every battle when the side that is losing begins to understand it. Not when they accept it. That comes later, if at all. Just the first cold moment when the numbers stop adding up the way they were supposed to. For Urak, that moment arrived quietly. His fleet had compressed into a tight defensive cluster. The 30 human destroyers were harassing the edges but not breaking through. The colony was still ahead of him, undefended. Everything was still proceeding according to a version of his plan, slower than intended, more irritating than expected, but still moving forward. Then his rear scanner officer said something in a voice that had gone completely flat. "War Commander, new contacts, all directions." Urak turned. He looked at the display. He looked at it for a long time without speaking because what he was seeing did not match any scenario his war planners had modeled. The contacts were not arriving from one direction, the way a reinforcement fleet would. They were not forming a line, the way a human defensive force was supposed to. They were dropping out of FTL from 12 different points scattered across a wide arc around his armada, above, below, behind, to both sides. And before the FTL distortions had even finished fatting, the ships were already moving, already splitting further, already spreading out like something poured from a broken container. 200 ships, human class, all of them smaller than his battle cruisers, all of them moving faster than anything that size had any right to move. Urrak said very quietly, close to full defensive posture. His fleet was already in a tight cluster. There was almost nowhere left to go. The order accomplished very little except to make his ships slightly more crowded and slightly more in each other's way. Admiral Sira had planned this approach for 6 weeks. Not this specific battle. She had not known this specific battle was coming. But the doctrine, the formation, the 12 independent strike groups. She had run the simulations, adjusted the numbers, argued with her senior officers, and eventually convinced them all that the old way of fighting the Dreth was not working. Matching a Dreth broadside with a human broadside was like trying to stop a hammer with your forehead. You might hold for a moment, but the outcome was not in doubt. The new way was different. Each of her 12 strike groups had a designated section of the Dreth formation to attack, but they did not attack their designated sections and then wait for orders. They attacked, assessed, communicated with each other through a tight beam mesh network that the Dreth jamming could not fully suppress, and then attacked somewhere else based on what the other groups had learned. The swarm link targeting system meant that if one ship found a weak point in a Dreth hull, every ship in range could focus fire on that same weak point within seconds. The Dreth were armored to withstand a broadside. They were not armored to withstand 8 ships, all hitting the same 3-meter section of hull from different angles. The battle from the outside looked like chaos. From the inside, it was something closer to a conversation, fast, overlapping, everyone talking at once, but all of it moving toward the same conclusion. Urrak tried to fight back. His battle cruisers were not helpless. Their point defense systems were good and they killed human missiles by the dozen. Their heavy guns found targets occasionally. One human frigate took a direct hit from a Dreth main cannon and simply ceased to exist. The Dreth were not harmless. But they were slow. They could not rotate fast enough, could not coordinate well enough without their relay ship, could not fire without risking hitting their own ships in the compressed formation. Every time a Dreth gun crew found a target and began to track it, the target moved, not randomly but deliberately, cutting behind a neighboring Dreth ship, forcing the gunners to hold fire or risk friendly damage. Dav and his original 30 destroyers were still working the gaps. They were not fresh. 2 of his ships had taken damage, and 1 had lost its missile array entirely, but they were still moving. He had added something new in the last few minutes. When the main fleet arrived and the Dreth formation began to panic, small holes appeared in the cluster, places where ships had shifted to face new threats and left their neighbors exposed. Dav's destroyers were hunting those holes, slipping through them like needles, firing into the softer inner surfaces of the Dreth ships that had never been designed to face fire from inside the formation. Shooting at someone from inside their own defensive circle was something the Dreth had no protocol for. Ray was watching all of this from the asteroid field with his mouth slightly open. He had seen fights before. Dock brawls, a pirate interception once, the distant flash of a border skirmish 3 years ago. He had never seen anything like this. The human fleet did not look like a fleet. It looked like something alive, something that moved the way a single creature moves, all parts connected, all parts aware of each other, the whole thing constantly shifting and adapting. He thought about the Dreth formation, so large and so slow. He thought about the human ships, small and fast and everywhere at once. He thought about the Hornets that had nested in the ventilation system of his first ship 22 years ago. He had tried to swat them. It had not worked. The problem with Hornets was that hitting one did not matter. There were always more. And they were always already moving. On the Dreth command bridge, Urrak received a damage report. 47 ships with significant hull damage, 11 ships with engines disabled, the relay vessel gone, 3 of his most experienced battle cruiser captains dead. He had not yet hurt the colony. He had barely hurt the human fleet. He sent an order to his rear guard to push forward and reinforce the center. The rear guard acknowledged. They began to move. They moved directly into Strike Group 7, which had been waiting behind a debris field for exactly this to happen. Urrak did not know that yet. He would know it in about 90 seconds. The rear guard walked into it the way a man walks into a dark room and finds out too late that the floor is not where he expected it to be. Strike Group 7 was 17 ships, a mix of fast destroyers and 2 heavier frigates that carried the EMP package. They had been sitting cold and dark behind a wide field of metal debris left over from an old mining operation. Engines off, no emissions, completely invisible to Dreth scanners. They had been there for 11 minutes, waiting. The crews were quiet. Some of them were eating. One weapons officer on the frigate Galloway had been halfway through a written letter to his daughter when the contact alarm sounded. He folded the letter and put it in his chest pocket. Then he went to work. The rear guard, 62 Dreth battlecruisers and support vessels, had not expected to fight. They had expected to push forward and add weight to the main engagement. They were moving in a standard column formation, their forward guns oriented toward the main battle ahead, their rear armor facing the debris field. Strike Group 7 came out of the debris field from behind. In the first 30 seconds, 3 Dreth support vessels were destroyed and 1 battlecruiser lost its engine section entirely. The rear guard column broke apart as individual captains tried to respond, some turning to face the attack, some accelerating to get clear, some doing both at once and colliding with neighbors. The 2 frigates fired the EMP package into the middle of the confusion. An EMP weapon in space does not produce a visible explosion. It does not make a sound. What it does is push a focused electromagnetic pulse through the hull of a ship and into every system that relies on electrical current to function. Shields, weapons, engines, life support, everything that runs on power goes dark at once. The crew inside is unharmed. The ship simply stops being a ship and becomes a very large piece of metal drifting in space. 43 Dreth ships in the rear guard lost power simultaneously. Ray saw it on his scanner. He watched 43 contact signals go from active to dead in the space of 2 seconds. He had been watching this battle for nearly an hour, and he had seen a lot of things, but this stopped him entirely. He stared at the screen. Then he pressed his hands flat on the console and leaned in close, checking that he had read the numbers correctly. He had 43 ships, gone dark. Not destroyed, his scanner could still detect the mass of them drifting, just off, just quiet. He sat back in his seat and breathed out slowly. On the main battle line, things had changed while the rearguard was being dismantled. The Dreth formation, already compressed and already struggling to coordinate, had lost the pressure from behind that Urrak had been counting on. The reinforcements were not coming. Instead, Strike Groups 8 and 9, which had been circling at long range and waiting for exactly this moment, moved into the space where the rearguard had been and began closing the last open corridor of the Dreth formation. Urrak was surrounded. Not symbolically surrounded, geometrically surrounded. Human warships on all sides at varying distances, all of them moving, none of them holding still long enough for a Dreth gunner to get a clean tracking solution. He could still fight. His ships were still firing. Some of his captains were doing good work. One Dreth battlecruiser, operating on its own initiative after losing communication with the command ship, had positioned itself cleverly against a debris field and was using the cover to blunt the attacks of 2 human strike groups. Another had managed to link shields with its neighbors and create a hardened pocket that the human frigates were having trouble cracking. Individual Dreth officers were capable, intelligent, trained. The problem was that Dreth warfare was built on central command. Every ship expected orders. Every ship waited for coordination from the top. When the relay ship died and communications became difficult, and the battle fragmented into 100 smaller engagements all happening at once, the Dreth captains did their best, but their best was to look for the nearest friendly ship and try to form a small battle line. Human captains, trained under the new doctrine, did the opposite. When communication broke down, they looked for the nearest enemy vulnerability and hit it. They had been trained to work without orders, to read the shape of the battle themselves, to trust that the other strike groups were doing the same thing, and that the whole swarm would hold together even when no single person was directing all of it. Sira watched the battle from her flagship's command bridge. She was not giving many orders. The plan was in motion and her captains were executing it. Her job now was to watch for things going wrong, ships in trouble, a Dreth breakout attempt, some unexpected response that required her to redirect a strike group. What she saw instead was the Dreth formation slowly going quiet. Not all at once, in pieces. A ship here signaling a ceasefire, a ship there going fully dark with its escape pods launching. A cluster of 4 battlecruisers that stopped firing entirely and began broadcasting on an open frequency. Not the jamming signal, not a weapons lock, just a single repeating tone that any species with radio technology would recognize. "We are done." Urak had not given that order. His captains were making their own decisions now, and the decision that most of them were arriving at independently was the same one. Continuing to fight was killing their crews for no gain. The colony was still intact. The human fleet was still fully operational. There was no version of this engagement that ended with a Dreth victory. Urak stood at the front of his command bridge and looked at his display. 43 ships in the rear dark and drifting. 61 ships with serious damage. 19 ships destroyed. 94 ships that had stopped fighting. He had started this engagement with 412 ships and the certainty of a stone before it falls. He pressed the open channel broadcast. "This is War Commander Urak. All Dreth vessels hold fire." There was a pause, then he added the rest of it. "Prepare for contact with the human fleet commander." Outside in the asteroid field, Ray's scanner showed the Dreth signals going quiet across the board, one after another, like lights being switched off in a building at the end of the day. He watched until the last one settled. He thought about 900 people in that colony who had never known how close it had come. He picked up his comms, clicked off the military frequency, and switched back to the cargo channel. Somewhere out there was a dock administrator waiting for a delivery that was now several hours late. Ray had a manifest to file and a cracked coolant pipe to deal with. The Hornets had done their job. He fired up his engines and headed for the dock. The Dreth flagship was called the Voan Absolute, and it was the largest ship in the Armada, a kilometer and a half of dark-plated metal, wide enough at the center that the command bridge sat in a structure roughly the size of a mid-sized human stadium. It had never been boarded before. No enemy had ever been close enough to try. Sira's shuttle docked at the secondary airlock because the primary was damaged. She walked through a corridor that smelled like metal and something she could not identify, a faint chemical undertone, slightly sharp, that she later learned was the Dreth equivalent of recycled air. The walls were high and dark, lit by strips of deep red light at floor level and dim amber panels above. Everything was built for creatures taller than a human, which meant the doorframes were high, but the consoles in the room she passed were also high, at Dreth chest height, which was somewhere around human eye level. 2 Dreth guards waited at the entrance to the command bridge. They were large, broad, gray-green, and they did not step aside immediately. They looked at Sira with the specific expression of beings who had never expected to be in this situation and had not yet decided how to handle it. Sira looked back at them without hurrying. After a moment, they stepped aside. Urak was standing in the center of the bridge. He was taller than she had expected, She had studied the intelligence files, but files did not convey scale the same way a room did. He was easily 2.5 meters, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of physical density that came from being born on a high-gravity world. His plated skin was darker than the standard Dreth coloring, almost charcoal, and the lines of it across his face and neck were deep. He had 4 fingers on each hand. His eyes were small and very dark, and they tracked her from the moment she stepped through the door. Sierra stopped at a comfortable speaking distance and said nothing for a moment. She had learned in her career that silence in a first meeting was not a weakness. It gave the other person time to fill it, and what they chose to fill it with was useful. Urak said, in the Dreth military tongue that her translation earpiece converted into flat human words. "You are smaller than your ships suggested." Sierra said, "Your ships were larger than your tactics suggested." There was a pause. Something shifted in Urak's expression, very slightly, barely readable, but she had spent 30 years reading people and she caught it. Not quite amusement. Something adjacent to respect that he had not planned on showing. He gestured toward a wide surface near the main display. It was not quite a table, too high for humans without standing on something, designed for Dreth to stand at and review materials. Sierra moved to it without hesitating, stood on the step rail at the base of it as though she had always intended to do exactly that, and put her data tablet on the surface. "Ceasefire terms," she said. "I will cover the main points. Your translator will have the full document." Urak looked at the tablet without touching it. "You intend to take my ships. We intend to escort your disabled ships to a neutral point where they can be repaired and their crews assessed. The ships that are still operational will withdraw under ceasefire protocol. No Dreth vessel will be held past 90 days unless there is a specific finding of war crime, which we do not currently anticipate." Urak was quiet for a moment. "You are not demanding territory." "No." "Reparations." "No." "Then what," he said slowly, "do you want from this?" Sierra picked up her tablet and turned it to show him a single document, not the ceasefire terms, something shorter. A paragraph. Urak looked at it. The translation earpiece turned the written Dreth words into something his officers could read on their screens. What it said was simple. It said that the Dreth Collective was to formally record, in its official military history, the full account of this engagement, not a version that softened the outcome, not a classified report, but a complete account to be shared with every military institution in Dreth territory. What happened here? How it happened? Why it happened? Urak read it twice. "You want us to tell our own people that we lost. We want the collective to understand what it faced," Sierra said. "Because this is not the last time humanity and the Dreth will occupy the same space. And the next Dreth war commander who looks at a human colony and sees an easy target should know what happened to the last one." The bridge was quiet. The Dreth officers standing at their stations were all watching, all listening. Urak reached out and pressed one large finger to the confirmation point on her tablet. The earpiece translated the soft sound it made as a completed acknowledgement. He said, "Your people fight in a way I have not seen before." Sierra was already stepping down from the rail. "We fight the way things fight when they have learned they cannot win by being bigger than everything else." She walked back toward the corridor. At the doorway she paused, not turning around. "Your crew will be treated well. The ones who need medical attention will receive it. I want you to know that." She left without waiting for a response. Outside in the shuttle bay, her aide handed her a status report on the fleet. Damage totals, crew injuries, ship assessments. She read it on the ride back. 14 human ships with serious damage, 3 destroyed, 41 crew members dead. She put the report face down on the seat beside her and looked out the shuttle window at the colony, still intact on its gray asteroid surface, still lit up with its small industrial lights, its towers and domes and the lives inside them going on, because a lot of people had done hard work in a short time. She did not feel triumphant. She had learned early in her career that triumph was a thing that came and went quickly, and what remained after it was just the next problem. But she allowed herself, for the length of the shuttle ride, to feel that what had been done today had been done well. The battle data leaked within 72 hours. Not through any official channel. Someone no one ever confirmed who had uploaded the raw scanner records, the fleet communications logs, and the full tactical breakdown of the engagement to the Open Galactic Data Network. The network was old, slow, and used by dozens of species for trade records, navigation charts, and academic correspondence. It was not a military network. It had no encryption to speak of. What it did have was reach. Within 4 days, the data had been accessed by 314 different receiving stations across 9 species territories. A researcher on a planet called Vel Assos, which had no word for war in its original language because its people had not fought one in 600 years, was the first to write a formal analysis. She had never studied military history. She studied large system behaviors, migrations, weather, the movement of schools of ocean creatures. She read the battle data the way she would have read any other data set about things moving in space. Her paper, published 3 days later, was called something that translated roughly as, "They do not move like ships." It observed, in the dry language of someone who had no emotional stake in the subject, that the human fleet displayed a coordination pattern almost identical to what her field called emergent collective behavior, the kind seen in fish schools and insect swarms, where individuals follow local rules and the group-level intelligence arises from that without any central direction. She noted, in the paper's final paragraph, that this form of behavior had one specific property that made it very difficult to fight against. There was no head to cut off. You could destroy individual units. The whole would simply close around the gap and continue. The paper was shared widely. On the Senari homeworld, a species of tall, thin beings who communicated primarily through color changes in their neck membranes, the military council had a private session that lasted 9 hours. The Senari had been watching humanity for 2 decades. They had assessed humans as a moderate-tier species, dangerous enough to avoid provoking, not powerful enough to be concerned about. The kind of neighbor you kept cordial relations with and did not think about too hard. The assessment was updated that evening. Urak's report, the official one, the full account that Sira had required him to submit, reached the Dreth Collective's high command 12 days after the battle. There was significant internal debate about whether to actually publish it as agreed. There were voices in the collective who felt that making a loss of this scale public was a political problem, a military embarrassment, an invitation for other species to test Dreth limits. Those voices were overruled. Not because the high command was honorable necessarily, but because they were practical. The battle data was already everywhere. Any version the collective released that softened the account would be immediately compared to the raw data on the open network and found to be a lie. A lie would be worse than the loss. So the full report was published, as agreed, with official Dreth military formatting and the war commander's name at the top. It was read very carefully, by a great many people who were not Dreth. In a station at the edge of outer reach, a young pilot named Nessa was doing her certification exams when the story came through on the news feed. She was 19. She had grown up in one of the outer reach colonies, not the one that had been threatened, but one like it, small and quiet and a long way from anywhere that mattered. She had signed up for the fleet 2 years ago because the fleet was hearing, and she was good with her hands and she liked speed. She read the battle report 3 times. She did not read it like the researcher on Vel Assos in terms of systems and patterns. She read it like someone who understood what it was to live far from safety, and to know that the distance between you and something very large and very bad was not always as great as you hoped. She finished her exam and passed. Ray heard about the official report on his 3rd cargo run after the battle. He was at a fuel station 6 relay points from where it had happened, sitting at a counter eating a hot meal, an actual hot meal, not noodles from a tin, when someone at the end of the counter mentioned it. The fuel station keeper had pulled up the report on a wall screen and was reading key sections out loud to whoever wanted to listen, which was apparently everyone in the place. Ray listened without saying anything. He had not told anyone what he had seen. He did not plan to. He was not the kind of man who turned his experiences into stories for strangers. But he did finish his meal and sit there for an extra 20 minutes, listening to the keeper read the report, and he felt something settle in him that had been slightly unsettled since the night his scanner had screamed at him in the dark. Not pride exactly, something quieter. The feeling of a question being answered. He had pressed the beacon button that night because it was the only thing he could do. He had not known if it would reach anyone in time. He had not known what would happen if it did. He had stayed in the asteroid field instead of running because running would not help, and because some part of him, some stubborn and not entirely reasonable part, had not been willing to leave 900 people alone with 400 Dreth warships without at least doing the one small thing he could do. He had not known the Hornet fleet was this. He had not known the doctrine, the swarm link targeting, the EMP packages, the 12 independent strike groups. He had known almost nothing. He had just pressed the button. The keeper finished reading and folded the screen away, and someone else at the counter said it was the most remarkable thing they had heard in 20 years, and someone else agreed. Ray paid for his meal. He picked up his manifest and his jacket and walked back to his ship. The coolant pipe had been fixed 2 weeks ago, and the cargo clamps were new, and everything was working the way it was supposed to. He ran his pre-flight checks, filed his course, and eased the freighter out of the dock. The stars opened up ahead of him the way they always did, wide and dark, and full of things he could not see yet. He had 3 deliveries to make and 9 days to make them in. He went.